Welcome to Workplace Wake Up, your go-to podcast for practical employment law guidance. I'm Jennifer Shaw, the founder of Shaw Law Group, and I'm here to help HR professionals and leaders navigate the legal minefields of the modern workplace. Each week, we tackle real-world issues with clear advice and a little tough love. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. We're almost at Thanksgiving. I ordered my turkey and I ordered all of my food, and I can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. I'm really looking forward to it. I get to see my niece from Oregon, who I don't get to see all the time, so I'm super excited. So, very grateful for you to join us here this morning on the podcast. Now, we're going to talk about workplace violence, and I know what some of you are thinking. Oh my gosh, she just had a webinar on this topic. We've talked about this before on the podcast. Yes, we have, but some of you are not complying with California's SB 553 requirements. And we've got to do it. You don't have to use Shaw Law Group to do it, but I need you to understand what is going on here with SB 553. By the way, that is the law in California that requires employers to have a workplace violence prevention plan and a number of other things in place. Now, it's not just California. And I said this last week, and I probably said it the week before that and the week before that. California is not the only state that is getting these kinds of laws, okay? Workplace violence has become a bigger and bigger problem as each year goes by, all right? And workplace violence doesn't just happen, okay? There are warning signs. And I want you to think about how you can do your best at least to prevent workplace violence in your organization, because we have a lot of tools. Now, way back on July 1, 2024, SB 553 became a law, all right? And it requires every employer in California, that means you have one employee in California, you don't have to have your headquarters here. You have one employee in California, it requires you to have a written workplace violence prevention plan. And when you think about having a plan, some people have said to me, but Jen, you can't predict workplace violence. Yes, you can. You can't predict the day it's going to happen. You may not be able to predict who's going to engage in it, but I can tell you workplace violence happens every day. Now, again, we're back to definitional terms. Some workplace violence is what we call a mass workplace violence incident. Somebody brings a gun, they kill people at work. Okay, that's a mass incident. But bullying, yelling, threatening, throwing things, that's violence too. So this kind of thing happens regularly in the workplace. And if you have to sit down and prepare a workplace violence prevention plan where you have reporting procedures, you have to do hazard assessments, you have to do training, and you have to maintain records. If you have to do all that, you will think this through more thoroughly, and you will have more steps in place to prevent workplace violence. And that really was the purpose of the legislature enacting this law. Now, a couple of annoying things about this law. First of all, you have to do annual training. You don't just do it once. You have to do it annually. You also have to do it if you have a workplace violence incident. Now, I just got done telling you that yelling can be workplace violence. Does that mean you have to do training for every employee when somebody raises their voice? No, but it does mean you should coach the person who does it. I have a loud voice naturally. It doesn't take too much for it to sound like I'm, quote, yelling. So we have to really think about how we're going to implement this requirement and what steps we're going to take. What I don't want you to do is close your eyes, plug your ears, and decide it's not relevant, because it is. And if you don't have a workplace violence prevention plan, if you're not complying with SB 553, and something happens in your workplace, the courts are going to throw the book at you because you have not done what you needed to do to prevent the problem. Okay, that is a huge issue in the universe right now. Remember, every one of these mass shooting events that we hear about, it's usually happening at somebody's workplace, right? That doesn't mean it's happening from an employee. But when there's a shooting at a grocery store, well, people work at the grocery store. So it's a workplace violence incident for them. When a shooting happens at a mall, there are people who work at the mall. So this conduct touches everybody. There's no industry, no employer size, no town that is going to be completely immune from a workplace violence incident. And I'm passionate about this topic. I have been since my first year in law school when we had the shooting in San Francisco at 101 California Street. More than 10 people lost their lives that day. And the employer had received warning after warning. Am I blaming the employer? No, there's no blame. But they had warnings, and then people would get a warning, and then they would get a threat, they would quit, right? Not because of the threat, they would just move on, like the HR person would move on to another law firm. And then when the new HR person came in, they didn't know that this former client had been writing to the firm for years, making threats. They thought when they got their first threat, it was the first threat. So there were all kinds of things that came together that day at 101 California that resulted in that incident. But I was a first-year lawyer. I knew people who were working in that building as a summer associate. And I just couldn't believe that could happen at work. This is before we had all these school shootings. This is before we had all of this violence, at least before we could watch it so readily. We could see it so quickly on Instagram and Facebook. And it really became a passion project for me, trying to figure out how do you prevent workplace violence? What kind of policies do you need? What kind of training should you offer to your employees and require them to participate in? So when the California legislature decided, that's it, we're done, we're passing SB 553, I applauded them. I thought it was a good idea. I know it is more burden for employers. I get it. But when we talk about workplace violence, particularly, of course, these mass incidents, we may not get a second chance, right? We may not get the opportunity to prevent something. Certainly, once it happens, the opportunity is gone. So if we have to spend a little effort and a little time and a little energy on workplace violence prevention, I think it's a good use of our resources. So if you're listening to this podcast and you have one employee in California and you haven't done what you're supposed to do, don't worry. There are all kinds of resources available. Cal OSHA has a program online they can help you with. You can do training. We offer all-in-one packages where we do everything for you and you're done and you get a video and you can watch it with your new employees, whatever you need to. Whatever resource you use, I just want you to get this off your list. If you've had too much to do in 2025 and you realized, okay, I just can't get it done. 2026 is my year. I'm going to have it ready. I'm going to get it done. Put it on the top of your list, because I can assure you, if something were to happen in your workplace and you didn't have this in place, not only are you going to have significant liability, you're not going to be able to live with yourself, because you're going to know that you could have done something, that maybe you could have prevented what happened. So I want you to take the time to sit down, read SB 553. Every law firm, every HR consultant, every PEO in the universe has written articles on this. They have free resources for you, and they have things you can use. There's no excuse. And you can go to the Cal OSHA website, okay? There's no excuse for you not to get this done. One of the things that I think happens, you guys, is that if we have to sit down and do a workplace violence prevention plan, that means we have to think about the fact that violence could happen in our workplace. And that's not something we want to think about, right? When I go up and fly in an airplane, I don't love flying. And part of it is because I'm afraid that the plane's going to have a problem, right? And of course, you hear about little problems here and there, but most of the time, flying is super safe, right? Way safer than riding in a car even. But that doesn't mean my fear is going to go away. I just have to face it, right? So I get up there and I say, okay, I'm not in a plane, I'm on a bus and it's a bumpy road. And that's why I'm, feeling like I'm in a washing machine, right? Just had that going up to Canada. Went up there to see some polar bears. And I got to tell you, the weather was crazy. So when we think about workplace violence prevention, I know it can be scary. I know we don't want to create panic among our employees, but that's not what this law is about. It's about dotting your I's and crossing your T's, sitting down and thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? How am I going to identify the warning signs of workplace violence? What am I going to be thinking about? Now, we've heard about these for years, right? Changes in behavior, escalating frustration. Somebody expresses a fascination with weapons, more than just I go hunting, right? Somebody brings in pictures of a bunch of weapons and says, which one do you think I should buy? And I might want to use it here. I mean, this stuff happens. We hear about these things every day in our firm from clients. Bullying, intimidation, veiled threats, they're not super specific, but it's something like, I don't really want you to be here anymore, and maybe I'll take care of that. What? Like, take care of it how? Like, what are you talking about? And there's so much stress and anxiety in the world right now that it's not surprising to me that we have more workplace violence. People have personal crises, and oftentimes they spill over into work. In fact, if you look at the Cal OSHA statistics and also the federal OSHA statistics, what we call domestic violence spillover, where somebody is having problems at home and that violence spills over to the workplace, that accounts for about 40% of workplace violence. So somebody is engaging in abuse at home. Maybe the spouse or the partner gets a restraining order. Now the abuser can't find them at home. They're not there anymore. So what do? They come to the next best place, the workplace, and they try to find the individual there. If we don't have policies and procedures in place and we're not prepared for that, it's going to be very hard to think in the moment. Right? It's just like these ICE raids that we're having, where immigration and customs is going into workplaces and they're, in many situations, roughing people up and just behaving in a way that is really extreme. If you're going to try to figure out what to do about that in the moment when it's happening, you're not going to be successful. I want you to have an ICE action plan. I want you to know what you're going to be doing and have phone numbers available and have resources available. Same thing with workplace violence. That's what it's about. Planning ahead, making sure that you understand what your obligations are and taking appropriate steps up front. I know it seems overwhelming, folks, but it isn't. It's pretty easy. All the information you need is on the Cal OSHA website. It's very simple. This is not going to take a lot of time. Do you have to train your employees? Sure, it could be a 20-minute training. It's not like equal employment opportunity training. You can videotape it. You can show it. There have been no new rules yet. So if you recorded a video in 2024 or 2025, you can still use it. But we are expecting some new regulations in January. So you may have to make some changes for 2026. We'll see what happens. We don't know for sure. In the meantime, read the law, read some articles, figure out what you need to be doing. And then I want you to really communicate the message to your employees. This isn't about picking sides. This isn't about trying to dictate what your behavior is. This is about our culture, right? Preventing workplace violence is not just about compliance. It's about who we are as individuals, what our culture is like. If employees feel heard and supported, they are much more likely to speak up before something happens. That is a huge prevention tool when it comes to workplace violence. So I want you to review your plan if you've already got it in place. If you don't, get one in place. Make sure that everybody is trained on the plan, on your prevention strategies, on what to do if they have a complaint, where to go if they're in the middle of a violent situation. And I want you to make prevention part of your everyday practice in your workplace. Some of you have workplaces where violence is part of your job. You might be in law enforcement. You might be in a federal DEA agency, for example, where violence is just going to be there. I get it. But you can still manage those situations. You can make sure people get appropriate counseling when they've been through an incident, that they get the help they need. These days, I think we give our brains too much credit sometimes. We think we can just bounce back from things, that we're not going to react, that we're not going to have a problem. But workplace violence prevention is so critical because when violence happens at work, it is life-changing. It's life-altering. Even if nobody is permanently injured, the fact that you no longer feel safe in your workplace is a huge deal. So everybody get compliant with 553. Go out there, protect your employees, be safe, do something nice for someone, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. before we sign off, I want to remind you about our 25th annual legal update. We have 3 sessions. I want to make sure that you sign up for them before they fill up. We're going to talk about all the new statutes for 2026 and all the relevant court decisions, as well as any other agency developments. So go to our website, sign up, space is limited. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Workplace Wake Up. If you found today's discussion helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your HR and leadership teams. For more insights, training programs, and legal updates, you can visit us at shawlawgroup.com.